brief mediated or moderated discussion. Now, the moderated discussion will be a period of 10 minutes. And after approximately 5, there will be one representative from one of the parties. Two parties will be represented during the moderated discussion. They each have approximately 5 minutes. If they go beyond that, I'll ask them to cease and desist. I'm talking to a room of teachers here. Why do I even need to mention that? And at the end of it all, we'll have, again, general issues from healthcare, the economy, the environment, social programs. And each will have a question from the audience. So please bear with me. I have no particular order. I haven't thought about this particularly, other than the fact that I have a list in front of me which begins with the Wild Rose Party, or the Alberta Party, then the Wild Rose, the Alberta Liberals, the New Democrats, and the Progressive Conservatives. So I think we should start on the right, and I'm not sure that's how this party would self-identify, but we'll start with Sue Huff from the Alberta Party. And remember, you each have 2 minutes.
Wonderful, thank you. Hi, my name is Sue Huff. I am the Alberta Party candidate for Edmonton-Glenora, which is where we are today. As a former trustee for the Edmonton Public School Board, the wife of a high school drama teacher, and the mother of 2 children currently attending school, I think it's safe to say that education touches every part of my life, and it's a huge passion of mine. So I want to thank the ATA for hosting this very important forum today. When the Alberta Party launched its authentic and ambitious citizen engagement process called the Big Listen, we wanted to learn what Albertans from all corners of the province, of all political stripes, felt was important and what they shared in common. It's probably no surprise to hear that education was a top priority shared by all Albertans. Albertans support investments in children. Albertans are concerned about our low high school completion rate. Albertans are grateful and proud that we have a public education system that is accessible to all students regardless of economic status, creed, or disability. And Albertans recognize the critical importance that education plays in shaping the future of our province. As we move increasingly into a knowledge-based economy, education will be the difference between moving ahead and getting left behind. And for addressing our social challenges, education is also the answer. As one Aboriginal leader puts it so well, education is the new buffalo. The Alberta Party envisions a well-funded public education system that is the cornerstone of all public policy, because we know that the more educated a society, the wealthier, the healthier, and the more democratic the society will be. Our education policy identifies 4 priority areas. Number 1, building community-centered schools where schools are supported to act as community hubs and collaborative decisions happen locally. Number 2, support for all learners and support for teachers so that all learners can be successfully included. Number 3, changing our assessment and accountability measures to reflect the real learning that is happening in our classrooms. And number 4, making our curriculum meaningful, relevant, and flexible in order to engage more students and foster a lifelong learning. I look forward to your questions, and I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Huff. Vitor Marciano.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me begin by apologizing on behalf of Guy Boudelier, who was really excited and looking forward to be here. I'm not sure everybody in the room knows this, but Guy was a teacher for a long time and an ATA member, and he wanted to come here and talk about our policies. Unfortunately, funeral in Fort McMurray of the wife of the longtime chair of the Fort McMurray Public School Board, so he's still thinking about public schools and education today. I am one of Wild Rose's 3 Senate candidates, so I'm running in the lesser-known election that will be coming up pretty soon. And I have to admit right off the top that I'm not an expert on education policy, but hopefully I'll do well enough. I am also the father of a kindergartner who currently sits in a French immersion kindergarten class of 29. So I'm a little sensitive to some of the issues that happen in education, and hopefully I can bring that perspective to it. I'm going to talk to you today, and hopefully you'll ask me questions about Wild Rose's education policy and about some of the commitments we made. We've recently put out our commitment to parents and educators, and I'm going to summarize it now, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about it a little bit more later. But we are committing to more education funding. We're committing to more teachers for our children. We're committing to more schools where they are needed. We are committed to more parental choice. We're committed to more improved student learning and assessment. And we want to see more support for students with special needs. I want to talk about those things. Sometimes folks have a perception that Wild Rose isn't all that interested in teaching or education, and I can tell you that nothing is farther from the truth. Our education system, which is excellent, by the way, is the number one thing that's going to lead to a prosperous future in Alberta. And we think that that needs to be developed, it needs to be promoted, and we're going to work hard to make sure that you as teachers get the support you need from the government, and that Alberta parents and Alberta children get to experience an excellent education system. Thank you.
Thank you, Vitor. Raj Sherman from the Liberal Party.
Thank you. I didn't speak English when I came to Canada in grade 1, and French was my best course in grade 12. I'm a product of an education system, as are my children, who started off at McKernan. My daughter likes drama and French, so she went to Ainley. My son attends Scona for track and film studies. I agree with choice within the public system. I have the utmost of respect for teachers. They raised my kids and me. My mom and dad were teachers in India. I taught in the medical school. Alberta teachers educate and prepare our children and our society for a better future. To you, our teachers, a sincere thank you. My friends, we live in a global and flat world. Countries that out-educate us today will outperform us tomorrow. We have a baby boom, immigration, and a tsunami of sick young kids. We'll have 100,000 more children in 10 years. And that's why we need adequate, sustainable, adequate funding for our education system, not defunding of our education system. We need more teachers who also need more support to deal with the diverse and special needs of our children. We not only need new schools, but we also need to maintain the ones we currently have. We need CPP, community public partnerships, where our schools function as community hubs, a place for the wraparound services like social work, healthcare, and resource officers. Alberta Liberals believe that the full cost of education must be borne by the Alberta government. We will end school fees, a tax on working families, and provide teachers with a $500 tax credit recognizing your personal contributions. In order to address our high school dropout rate, we will also invest in providing a faster track to good careers for young people who wish to pursue trades and eventually eliminate post-secondary tuition. So that any Albertans wishing to learn will not see a mountain of debt as a barrier to an education. Students of all ages and incomes should feel welcome and safe while at school. No child should have to deal with bullying or learn on an empty stomach. My fellow Albertans, we get what we pay for. It's time to raise our taxes on the rich and the big corporations to invest in our children's education. If we want a knowledge-based economy, then let's invest in a world public education system. To this, the New Alberta Liberals say yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sherman. Rachel Notley from the New Democrats.
Well, thank you very much and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the NDP and as well as on behalf of our leader, Brian Mason. The Alberta NDP's vision for Alberta is one where we are all, as citizens of the province, able to share in our prosperity. And to do that, the education system is fundamental. It's the place where we need to start implementing that notion of sharing in the prosperity, ensuring everybody gets a benefit from that wealth. In order to do that, we need to have the government stop seeing our education system as a convenient source of revenue whenever they run short of funds, because they don't have the political courage to look for the revenue from those sources which are able and deserving to contribute more to the collective future of our province. I want to tell you a little bit about the experience of our family a couple of years ago. Both my children went to a small community elementary school. And 2 years ago, when the government delayed their decision on whether or not they would carry through on funding the collective agreement commitments made to the ATA, you may recall the decision wasn't made until July. There was a teacher in that school who'd been there for 2 years, and she'd worked very hard with all the students in the school, volunteering, working in running club, all that kind of stuff. She built a relationship with children throughout the school. She was a professional. She was that fundamental person that made sure those kids got a good education. And after 2 years of doing all that work that you guys know that you do every day, she was whisked away from that school and moved to another one because the government couldn't make a decision on whether or not to keep its promise until July of that year. That kind of management has to stop. We need to value our public education system. We need to value the role of teachers within that education system. We need to fund it not only predictably, but well. And in so doing, we need to make sure that the money is focused on our public education system. And we need to do, well, throughout today, I'll talk about all the other key platform elements that the NDP has with respect to our education system. I suspect I'm going to run out of time.
Yes, you are out of time.
Okay.
But thank you, Ms.
I'm
Notley.
looking forward to our conversation over the next 2 hours. Thank you.
Thomas Lukaszek.
Well, good morning to you. Again, it's always a pleasure to be here at Barnett House and meeting with all of you, particularly in this forum where we can discuss what I consider to be the most important topic in our province, and that's education of our kids. You know, when we think of Alberta and we think of natural resources, I always argue that our most important natural resource that we have in this province are actually our children. And we're doing well. And I'm here primarily to thank you for the work that you and all of us have done together up to now. I feel sometimes when I travel throughout the province more as a cheerleader than a minister, telling Albertans what a great education system we have and how we fare compared to all the other jurisdictions worldwide. And there is one big reason why we do that. And one of the big reasons is you, the teachers in our classrooms. Whatever it is that you're doing in the classrooms, you're doing well because the results obviously show it. And they all not only show it in how well our kids do in class, but in the level of engagement among Albertans in education. As you know, over the last 4.5, 5 years, education was at the forefront of a dialogue in Alberta. And some great things have happened in Alberta education. We have been looking at inspiring education and having great discussions around that. Transformative education, having great discussions about that. Competency-based curriculums and having great discussions about that. And all that is coming into fruition right now. And as a result of it, we have developed what I consider to be one of the most progressive and inspiring pieces of legislation, our new Education Act, which I hope will come into fruition very soon and will unleash 21st century education, allowing you, the teachers, to do what you know the best, teaching kids in our class in a collaborative way and in an innovative way, applying all the skills that you have in the classroom. I know that there are issues. There are issues in education like there are everywhere. But I also know that those issues can always be addressed. Infrastructure happens to be one of the issues. And as you have heard me say, you have a commitment from government for a much more robust and increased level of investment in infrastructure. You will be hearing me making some announcements over the next, hopefully, 4 to 5 days relevant to infrastructure. And I know that classroom sizes continue to be an issue, but I'll speak to that a little later.
Now we'll thank you for those very fulsome introductions, opening statements. We'll move on from here to our first issue area, which is education funding. And we have a question from the audience, from Dave from High River, but we'll do this in a slightly different order this time. We'll start with Vito Marciano and move down the table and end with Ms. Huff and the Alberta Party. Dave from High River, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Dave Matson. I'm a math and science teacher at the high school level in High River. My question is about education funding. The government of Alberta has pledged that the provincial education budget will increase by 1%, 2%, and 2% for the next 3 years. Since this increase will not keep up with projected inflation, does your party feel that this increase will be adequate to properly serve the learning needs of Alberta students?
It's a very good question. Wild Rose has some significant concerns with how the government has approached budgeting and how they've approached spending decisions over the last several years. Fundamentally, we think that the government has mismanaged significant amounts of money and has chased projects that we don't think are priorities for Albertans. We don't think 1%, 2%, and 2% is appropriate. We think that on frontline services, core services that serve Albertans, that the rate of increase in spending should match population growth and inflation. And that would imply a number closer to 2.5%, 2.5%, and 2.5%. And Wild Rose just recently put out, the day after the government put out its budget, we did our alternative budget and demonstrated how you could balance the budget within a year without cutting frontline staff. And in our alternative budget, we found another $114 million for education, which would allow us to hire 1,425 new teachers, teaching assistants, and support staff for students with special needs. If you focus government spending on the things that matter to people, and you do less corporate welfare, less centralization and creating massive bureaucracies, if you don't give cabinet 34% pay increases, you have an opportunity to find the money to pay for the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are frontline education, frontline healthcare, and key social services. So as a party, we don't think the current projected increase to education is appropriate, and we don't think most of the government's budgeting decisions are appropriate.
Thank you. Raj Sherman.
Dave, good question. The simple answer, no. Real simple. One, there's cost of living, and there's population growth. There's the teachers' salaries, then there's the number of teachers. We're already 650 teachers down from 2 years ago, 450 from last year. Under Thomas's current plan, we're going to lose another 400 teachers at a time when the number of kids are increasing and the needs of those kids are increasing. Then we have $192 million in private school funding. Well, that's got to get cut. Public tax dollars got to be for public education. Not only do we need teachers, the teachers need support. We need to pay for those wraparound services. We don't just need a school nurse. We need the whole team, the social worker, the nutrition counselor. We probably need the nurse practitioner as well, the school resource officers that Thomas is cutting right now. That's got to stop. If you want to fix Alberta's problems, you got to invest in education, and that requires true leadership. That's what the Alberta Liberals will provide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raj Sherman. On to Rachel Notley. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, this government's given itself a lot of kudos for the fact that they've introduced predictable funding. But predictable funding, if it is not good enough, is not enough. And what they're currently proposing to fund over the next 3 years is not enough. We've got a number of shortcomings in this budget. First of all, they haven't anticipated reasonable bargaining outcomes with the ATA, and that's frankly disrespectful to the fundamental players within our education system. And whether teachers, thank you. Whether teachers seek out a greater pay raise, or whether you end up negotiating ways to manage your workload by bringing more teachers and more resources into your schools, either way, it's going to cost, and this government is not budgeting for it. As well, we don't have adequate funding for special needs funding. They'll give themselves, again, great kudos for having increased special needs funding. But in fact, as most of you know, all that did was undo the damage that's been created over the last 3 years by freezing special needs funding. And when you combine it with the $40 million cut to AC, we're still no further ahead. In fact, we're still behind. Ultimately, as Raj mentioned, we're down 700 teachers from 2 years ago. And the fact of the matter is that that wasn't enough. 8 or 9 years ago, we made a commitment to class size reduction, and we never met that commitment. So using 2 years ago is not even a good enough standard. We need to have proper class sizes so that you guys can do the work that you are trained to do, and so that it benefits all of us in terms of ensuring that our kids get that best start that we know that they can get and that they deserve. Finally, I agree as well with Raj's point. Absolutely, every dollar should be dedicated to publicly funded and publicly delivered schooling. We should not be taking public tax dollars to fund private schools. And that's a small amount of money that we can find, but at the end of the day, we need to invest in our education system as though we really mean that it's our future.
Thank you, Ms. Notley. Good. Thomas Lukaszuk.
Well, thank you. I'm sort of glad that no one in this room agrees that 1, 2, 2 is enough, because I'm with you. I don't think it is enough. And that is why the budget will be increasing over the next 3 years, at about 3.5% per year, every year for the next 3 years. As you know, the budget that we're currently debating at the floor of the legislature has an increase from $6.8 billion to $7.1 billion over the next 3 years, averaging at around 3.5% per year. The 122 allocation was an allocation for operations, but as you know, there is per student funding and there are numerous other funding envelopes which are increasing very significantly. On average, your total funding will be increasing at approximately 3.5% per year for every year. Relevant to class sizes, I agree. When you look at statistics, they actually look really good, on average. But that's like saying that if you stand in fire with one leg and in ice with the other leg, you're actually comfortable. Not the case. So we still need to continue working on classroom sizes, and you have the commitment to do that. Special needs has received significant increase, some $68 million. And also, we're developing a different funding formula that is much more equitable to not only all school boards and all schools, but all classrooms, allowing you much more latitude to provide kids with special needs, because we know that there are many kids that are not coded that present ourselves in our classrooms with special needs. And you will have the ability to address kids and their needs even though they're not coded. Salaries, we are in the middle of collective bargaining right now, and I have to tell you, I am very optimistic because I know we have 3 sides sitting at the table with a lot of goodwill. And I know that we will hammer out a deal that is good to all 3 partners, but most importantly, to our children in the classroom, which means happy teachers, happy kids. There is no doubt about it. And I know collaboratively we'll find a deal. But overall, you have seen a commitment from this government, particularly since Premier Redford took over, of not only financial, but commitment to education in general. And you have seen this government settle teachers' unfunded pension liability, which was an anchor that was hanging over our necks as well. So the commitment will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lukaszek. Ms. Huff?
Thank you very much. Well, it seems we all agree, which is fabulous news for you. Education deserves more money. Well, there we go. We can all go home now. I think it's interesting, actually, the common ground that we do share, and our party is very interested in exploring that common ground. So, like many people at the panel here, the Alberta Party thinks that private funding should be decreased. We also think that there should be sustainable and predictable funding. We think that there needs to be more support for children with special needs. So, I mean, I'm repeating a lot of what's already been said here, but that tells you that we all know what needs to be done. Now the question is, will it actually be done? There's been a lot of talk about how money is spent in the budgeting process. The Alberta Party is interested in opening up the entire budgeting process, because it's not good enough to make decisions after the fact or to be whipsawed back and forth. We actually need to have a constructive conversation with people, and that includes all the teachers and everybody that's involved in education, about where the money should be spent and how the money should be spent. And I think the more open that discussion is, and it needs to happen well in advance of the budget. It can't be, you know, a couple of weeks before the budget is going to be passed. It has to be something that happens months and months in advance. So we can actually talk about what are the real needs. When I was on the school board, I saw an incredible deficit in maintenance. We have buildings where the roofs are in need of repair, the boilers are 50 years old. This is a backlog that is a problem that has been accumulating for many, many, many years, and it's not going to be swept away with promises of new schools. We actually have to find a constructive way to maintain our buildings. The Alberta School Board Association has put forward a percentage that they feel needs to be allocated every year for maintenance. We need to be smarter about our planning, and I think that the more you are involved in that discussion, the better we will be. It's easy for politicians, and I include myself in this list, to make proclamations, but really if we're going to get down to the business of funding education adequately, we need to have a better conversation. And
Thank you, Ms. Huff.
Thank you.
We're moving on to the second part of every issue discussion, and this is the moderated discussion, where we will have representatives from 2 parties, in this case from Sue Huff from the Alberta Party and Thomas Lukaszek from the Progressive Conservatives, respond to a question from Bob from Olds. Bob?
Good morning. My name is Bob Worsfold. I've been teaching in Alberta since 1973, retired in June 2010. However, I still substitute teach. Unless you inherited a farm or your home, we all took out a mortgage to buy a farm or home. In the past, the Alberta government sold Alberta bonds to help raise money for infrastructure and other things. How does your party plan to fund the building of new schools for the expected 100,000 students rise in population over the next 10 years?
Am I first?
You can go first if you like.
Oh, how about I let the minister go first?
Sure. Thank you, Sue. Well, you probably have heard me make comments about this. Albertans don't live in tents until they save enough money to buy a house. They mortgage a house. And same needs to happen with schools. And I know that there are those who have already argued and will argue that we should pride ourselves in paying for everything cash up front. But frankly, if we are to do that, we will never build enough schools, and we will never retrofit and repair enough schools. I'm guesstimating right now that in our province, we will need some 400 new school buildings over the next 10 years just to keep up with our population growth and with some of the infrastructure that simply will not be able to be repaired. And that means that as Albertans, we need to invest in our children's future. They need schools now, not 30 years from now. So I have to tell you that I will be meeting with our Treasury Board coming up this week, and we will be looking at developing a new fiscal framework on how are we going to make sure that our children get the space that they need for this 21st century education that you're delivering, so the space matches the quality of learning that takes place in the classroom. But also, this is a working environment for you. This is where you work, and that in itself has to be inspiring as well. So I will be reframing the way by which we are funding schools, school buildings, in order to make sure that we do have adequate space, adequate schools, and schools that actually inspire learning, that the buildings inspire learnings, and that they are more than just a school, but they are community hubs, that there is a nursing station, that there is perhaps YMCA, definitely a daycare, and other wraparound services. So the school is not only a place of learning for children, but is a place for community gathering and a valuable asset for the entire community. This is where we're heading. This is the kind of dialogue you will be hearing over the next 2 months with communities, and this is how we will be building our schools. We need more schools. We need more schools right now, and we will be delivering on it.
Great.
Suha.
Thank you. I think our party is interested in decentralizing some of the decision-making, and we feel that school boards are actually in the best position to understand where schools are best needed and how to address the needs of their community. So for us, we feel it's more important for the school board to actually have the authority, the natural person power, to go and borrow money and to create the schools that are needed in their community. Currently, we have a system where the provincial government decides where schools are going to be built, and sometimes it may feel like it's done for political reasons, and we feel that should be decoupled, and that really the people who are in the best position to make those decisions are the local school boards working in concert with their communities. To pick up on the idea of developing new schools that serve as community hubs and that have multiple use in them, I would encourage the minister to look back into his own party's history and look at the designated community school program, which the PCs used to fund, which helped to actually create that in the existing schools that we have. So we don't need to do this with just new schools. We can create community hubs with the existing schools we have, and in particularly areas where there's declining enrollment and schools are not utilized 100%, it makes so much sense to bring in other services into those schools. So I would encourage the minister to look back into that designated community school program. It was very, very cost efficient, cost very little to open up the community, the school to the entire community for that benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Suha. Now we'll open it up to discussion from the other three panelists in no particular order. Whoever gets their hand up first can go. Rachel Notley it is.
Thank you for that. Well, let me know who wins the rock, paper, scissors thing over there. So, I mean, really interesting points. I mean, the thing that we have to remember is that the deficit that we have, the infrastructure deficit that we have right now with respect to our schools, are ones that is a deficit that's been introduced over the watch of this government. And so when, and with no disrespect, or with all due respect to the minister, when he says we're going to move on building all those schools that we now suddenly have to build, you need to consider the fact that we didn't build them over the last 40 years. So, you know, are we really going to get them going forward? We have a problem with the previous funding models. As you know, the P3 funding model is, in my view, a failed funding model. And it's certainly what we're starting to see now is evidence that we're not going to be able to accommodate the changes of the community and the needs of the community the way we had anticipated and the way we need to, because we've embarked upon a P3 funding model. And so we need to back away from that. I'm glad to hear the minister talk about the funding model going forward, but I also think we do need to focus on prioritizing what our local school boards are looking for, focusing on retrofitting if that's what the local school board says they need, and respecting the views of communities instead of whipsawing those local school boards into building the kinds of buildings the government wants built at the expense of what the community is asking for. So these are really, really important issues. And finally, what we need to do is make the process of when and where we build a school entirely transparent. As you know, we've seen a lot of discussion over the course of the last few weeks, which would make Albertans lack trust in the process through which our schools are identified and built. And that needs to change, because our education system is everyone's education system. And we need to have people believe and, in fact, have input and control in that process.
Either Dr. Sherman or Mr. Marciano. Rock, paper, scissors. Let's go here.
I'm just going to go. There's so many things I want to comment on. I get deeply concerned that this government only seems to get innovative about thinking about things whenever there's an election immediately coming. I'm deeply concerned with the fact that they're talking about building more schools again when an election is coming, because all of these major capital infrastructure decisions have been hideously politicized in this province. No cabinet, no political party should decide whether or not your kids need a school. If they need a school, there should be a formula. Everybody should understand the formula. There should be a way of prioritizing where the school goes next. And it shouldn't involve the political considerations of how a riding votes or whether or not its local elected officials are sufficiently friendly to the government. That's not the way we're supposed to do things. Now, I can't also let the minister get away with this. The thought that we need to go back into debt, deeply into debt, to build schools belays the fact that in many ways we're the richest jurisdiction in the world, and if we were to properly manage our affairs, there should be enough money on an ongoing basis to build an appropriate number of schools. It's a system whereby your jobs and Alberta's children's futures are sort of being held captive to political interests and the votes that they might get at election time with the promise of a school. And I just don't think that's an appropriate way to run an education system or to look after students.
Bob, I want to thank you for educating Alberta's children, and thank you for that question. There's a reason teachers teach history, so we don't repeat the same mistakes moving forward. We have to examine how we got here in the first place. Alberta has been selling pieces of the farm to the point where we're going to have no farm left. If you really want to if you build a building, the government's been concentrating too much on cutting ribbons just before an election to get votes. When you build a building, you got to have enough funding for regular maintenance so you don't need a new building 20 years later. You got to fix the leaky roof in the foundation and the boiler in the school. And you have to publicly finance this. We don't need private-public partnerships. Our schools are being turned into rental properties. The government gets money for 2% less if we borrow it. There's good debt and bad debt. Investing in a school building is good debt. And in fact, it's not debt at all. It's an investment, because 30 years later, that school's going to be worth a heck of a lot more. And if we amortize it over 30 years like we used to, we wouldn't have a problem that we have today. And the government stopped doing that. Our schools, decisions need to be made locally. Local solutions, local problems. The decisions should not be made from 200 miles away. Local municipalities, local school boards know what they need, allow them to do it. We got to put power and decision-making back in the hands of the people.
Thank you, Raj
Thank you.
Sherman. It doesn't seem fair, but you will have your full time in a discussion somewhat later. But thank you very much. We're moving on now to our second issue area, education policy. And we have a question from Dawn from Grand Prairie. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Dawn Thompson. I teach grade 5 at Kateri Mission in Grand Prairie. We have seen how private schools have destroyed the American public school system, creating a great disadvantage for poor children, and how the Finnish school system has flourished for all of their students, regardless of their economic status. Recognizing that the demographics of Finland are different from those of Alberta, which system do you feel best represents your party's policies on education? How will you implement changes to Alberta schools to better reflect these policies?
Thank you. At this time, we'll start with Dr. Sherman and go down the table. I would remind participants that they have 2 minutes in response. Thank you. Dr. Sherman?
Don, thank you. On the policy side, a few issues. First of all, with respect to the legislation, we got to stop. When they put this word choice in there, choice is code word for privatizing and Americanizing our public healthcare system, or education system, sorry. In fact, that's the same word they use for healthcare. It is the same thing. Be careful of the word choice. It's a bad word. We got to get rid of it. Number two, we need to have a policy to fund education properly. Not only teachers or the support, but also the buildings. Number three, there has to be some accountability. Somebody has to be held accountable. We have the highest high school non-completion rate, the lowest post-secondary participation rate in the nation, and yet we are the wealthiest province in the nation. I got a problem with that. I got a big problem with that. With respect to testing, I like the Finland model. That's a good idea. Let's free up teachers, not to have to teach to a test, but free them to teach to your ability and to what the students need. So we got to get rid of this mandatory testing in grade 3 and 6. Look at grade 9, grade 12, absolutely. Teachers are smart, kids are smart. Allow fantastic things to happen. The government's got to stop interfering in the education system. Bring in accountability measures, fund it, have good policy, stop privatizing, allow you to do what you're capable of. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sherman. Rachel Notley?
Thank you very much. So I think the question was about private schooling and our view of the value of that or the role of that in our education system. And I'd like to start by telling a bit of a story. When I was getting my post-secondary education, I moved out to Ontario for 2 or 3 years, or 3 years I guess it was. And I was quite surprised as I was at Osgoode Law School to find that at least half the people that I was at school with had been to private school. And there was an incredible difference there in terms of people being very conscious. Oh, I went to such and such school. I went to such and such school. And there was real evidence of what I would refer to as stratified old wealth. And people knew who, and people knew who didn't know those other people. And I remember being very proud of where I came from and bragging about the fact that at that time, the premier's kids and children, and that was Don Getty, went to the same school as kids whose parents were on income support, because really private school was not part of our culture in Alberta. I was very proud of that. That's changing now, and that shouldn't be the case. Subsequent to that time, the government decided to start funding private schools. 70% is going towards private schools. And so we're funding the right of a significant number of parents to use their relative wealth and advantage in order to provide inequitable levels of education to their kids. And we don't support that. Our basic policy around education, our values, is that our education should be inclusive, it should be equitable, and it should be accessible to all. And so we would not continue supporting this model. And the government's current plan to move towards expanding charter schools is a slippery slope in this direction. And we can talk about that more, but we're also opposed to that. Ultimately, we want an inclusive public system that respects the values that all Canadians hold dear, including our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, including our Human Rights Code. And that can be best delivered through a well-funded, accessible, equal public school system.
Thank you, Rachel Notley. Thomas Lukaszek.
Thank you. And Rachel, and I'm glad that you were proud that you went to Alberta public school system, because you probably got better education than those kids from Ontario that went to private schools over there. And that holds truth in Alberta. The fact is that we don't fund private schools at 70%. Students only get 70% of base funding, but they don't get any of the additional envelope funding, and they don't get any infrastructure funding. So they get a small share. And the theory behind that is that the parents of those children also pay property taxes. They pay their education property taxes. And I do like the word choice, because at the end of the day, that is what Alberta is all about. Parents get to choose. But guess what? More than 95% of parents in Alberta choose public education. Why? Because it is superior. So giving parents the ability to make a choice, there is nothing wrong with that, because they're making the right choices. 95% by choice choose to put their kids into public education, and that number hasn't been decreasing at all. As a matter of fact, the percentage of enrollment into public schools continues to grow. Our public education system is superior to any private education system offered anywhere in the world, and Alberta parents know that, and they're voting with their feet. They're choosing public education. And the fact is, it's private schools that make public education look good, because that's what parents are choosing. So giving parents choice, there's nothing wrong with that, and we're finding that parents are making the right choice. You know that this government's commitment has been and will continue to be public education. But giving a parent an ability to choose between different modalities of education, there is nothing wrong with that. As long as public education is adequately funded and every child has access to superior public education. And that's exactly what is happening in the province of Alberta. You know, I was briefly in Chicago, and I told them that if they were to move to Alberta, their kids would go to public education, and they squirmed. There is a different point of view in the United States, I agree, but it's not because they have choice. It's because they don't manage their public education as well as they do, and the great things are not happening in their public education as are happening over here.
Thank you very much. Sue Huff for the Alberta Party.
Thank you. I'm very confused by the minister's comments, and I'm hoping somebody out there might be able to translate for me. But what I heard was that 95% of Albertans choose public education, and it is superior. And so, but it's still okay for us to fund private schools because they provide a lesser quality of education, but somehow that's okay to let parents choose that. I don't get it. We'll have to have a conversation because I don't get it. I'm really stunned that a minister of education would say it's okay for some parents to choose a crappy education for their children. Anyway, we'll put that aside. I'm probably running out of time already. Anyway, but I am confused and I am listening. So I do try to understand everybody's point of view and everyone's perspective. Our party thinks that private education funding should be decreased. We think that there was a huge pushback when it went from 50% to 70%. The quibbling about the infrastructure funding aside, and that we felt that the public as a whole, if they know that private schools are being funded at that level, they are surprised, they are not happy, they don't think it's fair, and I think that government policy should reflect the values of Albertans. So I don't think Albertans as a whole support the idea of inequitable education. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue Huff. Vito Marciano.
I think of all the questions that might get asked today, this is probably the one where Wild Rose is closest to being in agreement with the minister. When we look at it, we think fundamentally that the issue is an issue of parent choice and student choice. I'm going to disagree with the minister on one point. I think private education and public education are different, and people have different needs and different wants from what they want from their education. I'm not going to say one is superior to the other, But I'm going to say this. The fact that 95% of Albertans choose to educate their children in the public system tells you how excellent the public system is. And I think the existence of charter schools and innovative school models within the public system and the limited competition from the small number of parents who choose to send their kids to private systems actually create a little bit of competitive pressure on the public system to keep it excellent. Unlike Ontario, I think the vast majority of our private schools are not about class structures or knowing the right people. They're actually typically about religious differences and other elements of uniqueness, and sometimes about certain core values in or core approaches in teaching style. I want to be part of an Alberta that recognizes a strong diversity. The fact that the public system has failed to capture 5% of the students, and the fact that only a small portion of the per student funding follows those 5% into another type of program, I don't think is a long-term threat to the public system, and I don't think it's a particularly strong issue. I think that the public system has continued to be excellent in Alberta. I think some of the pressures from the innovative models will help it be excellent in the future, and I really think that in the grand scheme of things, this is a very small issue relative to school funding, adequate funding for teachers, appropriate funding for schools and infrastructure, and that it's really not a major element of education policy at the time.
Thank you, Mr. Marciano. We're moving on to the second part of our discussion on education policy. This is the moderated discussion. And we have, first of all, a question from Jason from Lethbridge. And the two respondents, at least official respondents, are the Wild Rose Party, of course, Mr. Marciano, and again, Sue Huff from the Alberta Party. Jason from Lethbridge.
Good morning. Thank you for attending today. My name is Jason Schilling. I teach senior high English in Kate Andrews High School in Coaldale, Alberta. And specifically, I teach grade 12 English, and so my question sort of pertains to standardized tests altogether. My students feel the pressure of standardized tests, as all students in this province do, and teachers acknowledge that these exams are not a true, fair, or sound assessment of student learning. So my question to you is, if elected, what changes would your party implement to the provincial achievement and diploma examination program?
I'll go first. Fundamentally, I'm going to separate your question into two components because Wild Rose has slightly different answers for the two elements. But let me start with a fundamental principle. I actually think that some level of testing serves parents, students, and the general community well. I think our diploma exam, and I agree with the questioner when he says it's not a complete method for capturing the level of learning, but it is a method, and we don't rank it as being the only method. We rank it equally with the teacher's assessment. I think it creates an environment where there is some standardized approach to assessing between group variation, if I can use statistical terms. And I think that it's a system that Alberta students have and Alberta parents have grown used to, and I think it's served them well. I think our international results show that the system is working. I also think that at the diploma level that there is some significant educational research to suggest that there are students who underperform in terms of classroom assessments and actually demonstrate tremendous skills at writing diploma exams. And I've got to tell you, I was one of those students. My diploma exam scores were on average 10% higher than my class scores. It might have something to do with the fact that I was a disruptive, annoying student. Now, with regards to the standardized assessment tests in elementary, Wild Rose believes that we do need to have assessment testing. We think there are limitations and problems with the current testing model, and we think there's room to work with ATA and parents and students and professionals to improve the quality of those tests. But we think they're very important to have. We think that they create a little bit of creative and dynamic tension in the classroom, and we recognize that they're not a teacher's favorite thing, but I think in the long run, it gives parents one element of comparison between different schools, between different teachers, and one way to impartially assess the performance of their of their children.
Now, before, Sue, if I may interrupt, it's possible that you don't have to answer the question directly. Participants are free to exchange views, perhaps to use an old phrase, mix it up a little bit. But Sue, you now have the floor, and please.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to pick up on what Vitor just said, the last sentence about a tool, using it as a tool to compare schools. I think this is actually one of the biggest problems with the current PAT system. I fundamentally and categorically disagree with you on that point. Our party thinks that standardized testing, the PATs as they exist, are limited, and they should be reduced to just a sample testing until we develop a better tool. I think that we need to reduce the diploma weighting to 30%, so it's in line with other provinces. I think that we need to value and celebrate the fact that teachers are the best at assessing children, not anybody with the best of intentions at 30,000 feet up. And I think we want to move towards a wider variety of assessment tools that can really understand the dynamic and different ways that children do learn and the way that they can demonstrate their learning. And we'd like to see a research-based numeracy and literacy assessment tool developed for grades 1 to 9. I think relying on standardized testing is the wrong way to go. I think that it does start ranking schools, and as a trustee that went out to some of these schools that were at the bottom of the list, you need to get down on the ground and understand the enormous challenges that are happening there, and it is just absolutely categorically unfair to compare children who are showing up in poverty, that have not eaten, that do not have the supports, that have not had excellent early childhood education because our province doesn't invest in early childhood, to compare them with students who have had every advantage. So it's one of the biggest parts of our platform. It's one of the biggest parts of our education policy to change our assessment tools and accountability measures. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with, I think, Thomas Lukaszek and go to the right on this question.
Thank you. It's definite that PATs need to be reconsidered. They're not serving the purpose that they were intended to serve, and I think there is a better way of getting the job done. As you recall, and I don't have to tell anybody in this room, there was a good reason for PATs to be instituted in the first place, and it was to measure curriculum. But unfortunately, what has happened to them was not what was intended to be. They were never meant to be assessing teachers, rating schools, assessing principals, or even grading school boards. It's simply wrong use of a test that wasn't even designed for that. So we definitely need to reconsider PATs for that reason, but not that reason alone. As we have now committed to move towards competency-based curriculum, obviously the current PATs would not suffice as well for that reason alone. So I am looking forward to working with ATA, and we have started some work already on this, on rethinking how can assessment look so it's for learning and not of learning. And there are models out there, and I think we can develop a unique Alberta model that meets our curricular base, allows us to continuously develop this living document known as curriculum, and make sure that whatever testing we bring into place is a tool that teachers can use as a valuable input on not only what is happening in their classrooms, but also how are you applying curriculum vis-a-vis your colleagues in other classrooms in other schools. It's not meant to be an assessment tool of the system. It's meant to be a feedback so we can continuously develop curriculum. Now, grade 12 is a good segue because I'm also hearing about the inappropriateness of 50-50 split between class mark and an exam itself. And even though recent studies show us that our grade 12 mark actually is the most accurate mark that students get within the nation, other provinces have great inflation. I am definitely open to rethinking the 50-50 split. I have a lot of confidence in teacher testing in the classroom, and I do know that certain children simply underperform when they're writing a test, unlike Mr. Marciano, although I and Mr. Marciano probably were in the same boat. Our tests my tests were higher than my class marks, but if I attended class more often, that would have been somewhat different as well. But I think there is an Alberta solution that can be derived, and definitely educators, you teachers, will have to give us the input on how to get it right. Getting away with PATs is not an answer, but keeping them the way they are right now definitely is not the answer.
Rachel Notley?
Well, I'd say this. People talk about, research-based testing, and so here's what the research shows. If we had a properly funded, high-quality childcare system, if we had full-day kindergarten, if we had school lunch programs for students who need them, all of these things being initiatives which exist in most other provinces but not in Alberta. If we had all those things in place for 12 years, maybe 12 years from now, I would give some reconsideration to the notion of this bulk across-the-board standardized testing that we currently do. But we don't have it now, and as has already been recently pointed out, the testing can't work in the situation that we have right now. We would eliminate the PATs as well. And I find it, of course, particularly interesting that it's a grade 12 English teacher that's asked this question, because I can't think of a subject, well, there's probably social too, but anyway, that is more difficult to evaluate and test by a test that's developed by somebody, 600 miles away. We need to, first of all, give much more weight to the evaluation techniques that are developed in the classroom by the teacher for the kids that they're teaching. And then we need to work far more collaboratively with teachers to look at other types of testing. And then we should absolutely stop this process of using the PATs the way they are now. It's absolutely not helpful to anybody. And it actually moves towards some of the other negative trends that we were talking about earlier.
Thank you very much. Raj Sherman?
You can't compare apples to oranges, and you can't compare those who are raised in a wealthy, affluent area where the parents all have PhDs or engineering or education or medical degrees, to kids who live in the inner city, or young kids who are from immigrant families. Had we gone with the comparative testing, I went to the worst high school in British Columbia. It was supposedly the worst. But our class, we had a bunch of good kids. We had some good teachers. We did extraordinarily well, because we didn't have this standardized testing. My son's in grade 12, and he and his friends, and I was their coach for about 7 years in soccer and basketball, nothing stresses kids out more than this testing, which really doesn't test their knowledge. This multiple choice testing, I'll tell you, I'm great at writing multiple choice tests in med school, but it's not a true test of knowledge. You teachers know, you teach your kids, you know which kids need more help. In fact, we do need better management tools. The current system doesn't work for the inequities that we have in our society today. They simply don't work. And they're not working for the kids. The worst thing that could happen is for a young kid to think that they're stupid because they didn't do well on a test. And it stresses the heck out of them. Our young kids need to be inspired. They need to be encouraged. And if they screw up once or twice, you say, it's okay, you'll do better next time. We don't need to baby them. But when we identify that there are certain issues, you need to know why the kids aren't doing well in the inner city. It's because there are a lot of low-income parents. They haven't had a chance. And the resources need to be better in that school, more resources. Money following the student, it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it's the wrong thing to do. We need to address this issue, and the diploma exams do need to be changed. And the new Alberta Liberal government would involve you and engage you and make you a part of fixing the education system, as well as the kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good discussion. Now we're moving on to our third issue area, the future of the teaching profession. We will start, the first respondent will be Rachel Notley from the New Democrats, and we have a question from Carmen from Barhead. Carmen.
Carmen Wasliniak from Barhead. I teach junior high math and high school CTS. Rural Alberta continues to struggle and find and keep education and healthcare professionals who are willing to serve in our rural communities. What plan or supports do you have to create in order to help our rural residents? And what plans in general would you put in place to address the issue of teacher attraction and retention in these areas?
Well, That's a very good question. Now, let me think about this. I think that, well, first of all, I think that it is an issue when we talk about the teacher's profession generally. I think it's an issue that can in part be addressed in collective bargaining. And I want to just start by saying that I believe that teachers need to maintain the right to collectively bargain, and under no circumstances should that be removed, and nor should it be limited by any form of essential service legislation that's been suggested in other settings by other political parties. In terms of looking at hard to attract areas, I think globally the way we attract more teachers, not only to rural areas but to the profession generally, is we make sure that it's a rewarding profession that is well respected, where the workload is appropriate, where professional development continues throughout your life as a teacher, and where you're compensated accordingly and fairly. And I think that when that's the case, you bring more teachers into the profession generally. There's no question that our rural areas struggle, and so in some cases we need to look at providing incitements, whether it be through particular scholarship programs or tuition rebate programs, to consider having people commit to particular areas. Certainly that's an issue we've got in the healthcare system as well. And if we need to are going to maintain the sustainability and the health of our rural communities, we need to look seriously at these issues. I know our rural communities in many cases are suffering, but people are still committed to those areas. So it's important that we find ways to make sure that they have access to all the professionals that they need, teachers included. So I think those are reasonable things that should be discussed and worked out, and there should be a conversation, though, with teachers. And that's why I say, again, I think collective bargaining is one place where that can be done, as well as in broader conversations between government and the teaching profession, as well as in consultation with school boards. So that's our approach to it.
Well, let me share with you what is right now being done, and I'm hoping that it will address that issue, because you are raising a real issue, and that issue is not only in the teaching profession, but frankly across the board in most professions, attraction and retention of professionals into rural Alberta. One of the tools that we are developing right now, and I'm working in a very close collaboration with Minister Wiedek, Minister of Advanced Education, is to extend the ability for young graduates from high school in rural Alberta to be able to obtain their Bachelor of Education degree where they live, and not having to leave their communities and have to come to Edmonton or Calgary or large municipality to get their B.Ed. Because what often happens is that once they move to Edmonton for 5-6 years to get their Bachelor of Education degree, often they just simply don't return back to their home community. And we all know what an asset it is not only to have a teacher in a rural community, but have a local teacher in a rural community who understands the dynamics of that community, and it all makes us a better teacher. So that is one tool we're working on right now, expanding the provision of Bachelor of Education degrees as far as possible through colleges that are spread throughout rural Alberta. Another one is a system of bursaries and student loan remittances. And we're right now considering targeting remittances and bursaries at professionals who are needed in certain parts of Alberta. Basically, if you are a rural Albertan who commits to being a teacher in rural Alberta, you will be given special consideration for remittances on your student loans and bursaries to further attract you and make it much more attractive to return to rural Alberta or to stay in rural Alberta and continue to teach. But I agree here with Rachel. At the end of the day, quality conditions of work, of employment also are very important. So making sure that the facilities are adequate and welcoming to teachers, that workload, particularly on the assignable side of workload, the extracurricular and extra things that you are often required to do, and classroom size. Those are all things that need to be considered and are being considered. So this is something that has been on our radar for a while, and it is something that is being actioned right now as we're speaking.
Thank you. Suha?
Thank you. I think this ties into our rural policy, which talks about the sustainability and having vibrant rural communities. So I think there are a number of things that can make living in rural Alberta more interesting and more attractive. And if we focus on that and create a really wonderful life for people in rural Alberta, then they will stay there and they will work there and they will raise their families there. So there's many pieces to that, having a locally driven economy, having access to the arts and culture, having a strong, internet. I mean, being able to connect with the rest of the world. It seems odd to me that there are still communities in Alberta that don't have access to broadband internet. So I mean, there's some real obvious things that we can do to make life more livable in rural Alberta. I like the minister's ideas about making online education possible so people can actually get their degree closer to home and not have to incur extra housing costs as well, which add up the student debt. And I like this idea of remittance of bursaries. I think there's a lot more we can do and must do to ensure that there are great teachers no matter where people live in Alberta. And I'd like to see that we actually work more cross-jurisdictionally and that we work with the federal government and with Métis and First Nations because we haven't touched on it yet, but really the education on reserves and for our First Nations people in this country or in this province is a real challenge, and we have to start focusing on that and not have a third world situation happening for First Nations and Métis Inuit children. Thank you.
I find myself in an interesting position because there are elements of what Wild Rose has talked about on this issue where we agree with Minister Lukaszuk and elements where we agree with Rachel Notley. Not a particular one, but quite possibly. First, let me point out that Danielle Smith has talked in the past about the development of bursary and student loan reimbursement programs to encourage folks to take on their careers in rural parts of the province. And I think in the long run, that is the solution we will need to use in several professional areas to get folks into rural Alberta. And I commend the minister for bringing that up, and if the government works at that quicker, that would be a good thing. On the other element, I agree with Rachel that I think a big part of the solution lies in collective bargaining, and this is where I'm going to probably divert from the room a little bit. Wild Rose's policy on this is that the current system of collective bargaining for teachers isn't working because, as the minister said, you have three people at the table: the teachers who want to get paid, the government who's going to do the paying, and then the school boards who are going to have to try to figure out how in the world they can balance everything else out with the limited pocket of money that they're going to get. Wild Rose thinks that we need to get the collective bargaining back to the appropriate bargaining unit level, which is back to the local school board, and we think province-wide bargaining hurts in the long run getting more students in rural Alberta. Wild Rose also thinks that one of the ways that you fix this is that you have a predictable, stable, long-term funding formula that's not based on, these are our 3-year budget projections. They have to be based on, this is how much you're going to get per student with adjustments for rural versus urban, small cities versus big cities. And there's no reason why you can't develop a long-term funding model that school boards would understand, so at that point they can find a way to fund more teachers and to negotiate appropriately with the teachers at their level.
Thank you very much. Raj Sherman.
Carmen, thank you. Education is the main building block of society. Teachers help teach everyone from every profession and every trade. The Conservative Party is here to talk about making it a priority. But how are we going to fix rural education when the government's getting rid of 650 teachers already in the past 2 years? We got a baby boom. You got to walk the walk, Thomas. Can't talk the talk. You can't make education, fix rural education if you don't make education a priority. That starts with funding and a joint partnership between government, the ATA, and the school boards, the community. We're all in it together, my friends. We got to have enough teachers. We got to train them, and we got to teach them. We got to get them to schools in which to work and the supports that are required. We just got to do what needs to be done to get done. 1%, 2%, you can't put numbers to this. You just got to do what needs to get done. We need to show respect. We need to amend the Bill 2 and get rid of that word choice. We need to amend the other Bill 44 and start bringing you before the Human Rights Council. And you got to make this a priority. Now, we have to remove barriers to education for families by ending school fees, start a school lunch program, get you a $500 tax credit to acknowledge the contributions you make, expand registered apprenticeship programs. Young people in rural areas can't afford room and board and that high tuition in post-secondary. You have to make it's seamless. So let's cap and reduce tuition for post-secondary so our kids can actually go train to become teachers. Let's make student loans more accessible. De-link 18-year-olds completely for the parents on parental income, unlike the government. Complete delinking. And if you live and work in Alberta, you'll get 5% of your student loan back because you're going to pay the taxes to get it back. And at the end of the day, it's not just expanding distance learning, but it's making learning a priority. And this requires money, it requires investment. This is why we got to tax the rich and big corporations so we can actually have a better Alberta and a better future for our children in this province. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj Sherman. We're moving on to the second part of this debate, which is our moderated discussion. And the two respondents here will be Raj Sherman from the Liberal Party and Vitor Marciano from the Wild Rose Alliance. We have a question. They each have approximately 5 minutes. We have a 10-minute session here. And please, I would encourage the participants, the panelists, to respond to each other. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you interrupted someone on it. Not that this group would ever allow that.
We have separate microphones now, so we'll be able to interrupt each other.
But
I was just going to say that.
you are allowed to
Intimidated by the
do that here. And on that note, we have a question from Jeff from Brooks. Thank you, Jeff.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Jeff Mason. I teach junior high social studies down in Brooks, Alberta. My question today is, what is your party's take on the negotiation situation related to teachers in BC? And would your party consider introducing a bill similar to BC Bill 22, which imposes collective agreements and removes teachers' right to engage in lawful labor action, including work to rule? Thank you.
Raj Sherman, the floor is yours.
Jeff, thank you for that question. I'll be honest, I haven't paid much attention to the BC bill. I don't know the details. But no, government should not impose anything on people. The last I checked, it's a democratic country, and in democracy, freedom of speech is absolutely essential. Freedom to assemble, freedom to disagree with your government. I believe getting rid of that ability is tantamount to bullying, which we also need to get rid of, not only in schools, but in this government. In discussing collective bargaining agreements, I was, for the ER docs, I was there, the leader of their collective bargaining unit. We need to have a holistic approach to everything. Not just what you get paid, where you're going to work, what the culture at work's going to be. Are you empowered and engaged, and are you involved in building the system that you're going to work in? And that's what we need to focus on, beyond just agreements. And that's what hasn't been happening recently. Case in point. I'll give it over to Vitor. Vitor?
I think what's happening in BC is sort of an interesting example. I don't think it necessarily translates into Alberta. The relationship between teachers and the government in Alberta has generally been a little bit stronger and more collegial than it is in British Columbia. They've certainly got a different tradition of collective bargaining issues in British Columbia. As I said earlier, we actually think collective bargaining is the solution to a series of problems that are happening in education. We just think that the bargaining unit is currently inappropriate. And we actually think that when you get the bargaining unit down to a more local level, you actually can do a better job of representing the needs of teachers and the needs of students and parents. I don't think it's, our current situation is different. And I guess one of the risks of having province-wide bargaining is that you can end up with province-wide strife and very significant strife. And I actually think it's a bad model for taxpayers, it's a bad model for parents. Frankly, I actually think it's a bad model for teachers. Collective bargaining works at balancing the needs of the folks who are paying the money, which in this case are the taxpayers, and the needs of the folks who are doing the work, which is all of you. And the current model and the current system is working fine. I guess in some ways I've got less to say about it because I don't foresee the problems that BC is having as being problems that are entering into the environment in Alberta.
Can I interrupt there,
Please,
Victor?
please. And I think the minister is getting ready to interrupt both of us.
Victor, I appreciate you being nice here, but let's be honest here. The Conservatives have an ideology and a philosophy of union busting. They do. Now, Vitor, Thomas, here, you guys are both Conservatives here. Honest Conservatives right here and dishonest Conservatives.
I'll agree with that.
I ran into somebody recently, and they said they worked in a bar with somebody who was high up in the Conservative Party, and they said, we almost broke the backs of the teachers years ago. What kind of language is that from a leader? We almost broke the backs? Listen, my friends, Albertans are reasonable people. We are individuals and human beings and people who we collectively get together because we say, look, let's be fair, let's have one voice. It's an efficient way to bargain. It's not efficient to bargain with 100 different people all over the place. It's divisive. These governments have been dividing and conquering, and it's got to stop.
So if I could just interrupt a bit there, Raj. I mean, you are right about the position of the two Conservative parties here, but you do understand that the bill introduced in BC was introduced by a Liberal government. So, let's be really clear about where things are going here. Alberta's NDP would not ever do such a thing. We believe very fundamentally in the rights of people to collectively bargain. Collective bargaining is something that is guaranteed under our Constitution, and it's a fundamental right, and it should not ever be interfered with. So one of the things that Mr. Marciano did not spend a lot of time talking about is the previously articulated policy of his party that would take away the right of teachers in this province to strike. And let me just be very clear that the NDP would not ever support that either. The fact of the matter is bargaining on a province-wide basis, it does give you greater bargaining power, but so be it. At the end of the day, you bargain not only with your employer, but you bargain in a political and a public context. So you're not going to ask for things that ultimately loses you the support of the parents of the kids that you teach. You're going to be reasonable about how you do that. And if there's a bit of a disruption in the process, well, so be it. Every employee has a right to negotiate with their employer for the terms and conditions of their employment. That's a fundamental human right. It's not a right that's commonly recognized in this province, but it is one that's been very clearly articulated by the UN. And I kind of think the UN's a good guide for us. So I'm going to run with that one, even though this province doesn't actually have a labor regime that allows for that on a very frequent basis. So we would not ever introduce legislation like that. We support your right to collectively bargain. We understand the relationship you have with your kids and your students and the parents. We know you'll exercise that right responsibly and carry on.
Let me address that for 1 second. Rachel, that's the Liberal government whose chief of staff is Ken Bosenthal, a top Conservative strategist, and the Premier who's been hanging out with the Premier Redford, a
You're
Conservative
making
Premier.
my point for me,
It's a different Liberal
Raj.
government.
I think on that note, we should let Minister Lukaszuk have a response, but not too long, please, Minister. We want to, in the name of fairness, Ms. Huff.
Oh, there we go.
There you are.
I don't know why, but I'm feeling a little bullied by the guy who wants to eradicate bullying altogether. But let me tell you this. I simply refuse to even get into that kind of rhetoric because it is not constructive. I had the honor and the pleasure of being in a past ministry that dealt exclusively with labor. And now being in this ministry, right in the middle of a collective bargaining agreement, one thing I have noticed and learned is that there is actually a great deal of respect around the table. And sometimes you see union negotiations in other provinces and you scratch your head and say, how will they ever sign off on a deal? They're so far apart. in Alberta, we're not far apart. As a matter of fact, I keep on referring to the bargaining table as partners in education, because at the end of the day, I am convinced that every one of those three bargaining units, province, school boards, and teachers, have only one thing in mind, and that's continuously improving education for our children. So I'm not even thinking about legislation. What would you do if you went to war, and what kind of guns would you bring out? Because frankly, I am convinced that I won't need any. We have a profession that is committed to students. We have a government that is committed to students, and we have locally elected trustees. The only reason they run to be trustees is because most of them are parents or educators committed to students.
Thank
So,
you, Minister. In
thank
the
you.
name of fairness, I should move on and give the Alberta Party its 27 seconds.
Okay, I'll talk very fast. Yeah, I mean, the party absolutely supports the right to collective bargaining. It's odd that it's even a question whether you should have the right to strike. Of course you should. But I do want to say that as a trustee who was on the board when the province stepped in for supposedly the very first time to do province-wide bargaining because they wanted to deal with the unfunded liability, and promised us when I was on the board that that would be a one-time occurrence and that collective bargaining would be returned back to the hands of the school boards. I'm a little concerned that that has not happened. So I wonder really about the viability of school boards when they lose the ability to negotiate with their local ATA. And so I'm not speaking from a party position on that. I'm just speaking as somebody who did serve on a school board, that it's very difficult when the province says they're going to do something only this one time, trust us, and then suddenly now it's becoming a habit and a pattern. So I think we should all think about that.
Chick wants a response
But
to
notice
this.
what a
Go.
success story that was. Not only did we settle unfunded pension liability, which was the right thing to do, but we had the last 4.5 years were the best years that happened to education in a long, long time. We were sitting around the table talking about students and the things that all of us actually get paid to do, talk about education, curriculum, and learning. This was a great experience, and I don't see why we shouldn't
Minister,
repeat it
with all
again.
due respect, the deal that you did and the mechanism that you did in breaking away from the local level is what resulted in a $107 million shortfall that put teachers out of work last summer that you had to correct. If you make a promise but then you don't provide the school boards with the funding to do it, you create a problem. And that's what's happened with the way collective bargaining has been changed in this province.
Wow, thank you all.
You asked
for it. I should stop it here. Although several members of the panel look like they're on the verge of speech and exploding, and a fulsome discussion. Thank you all very much. Now we're moving on to what I would refer to as our lightning round. We have a variety of different topics here, and we'll start with healthcare, move on to the economy, finance, environment, resources, and social programs. Now, we will do it as a moderated discussion, and we have 5 minutes for each topic, so we need to keep it quick. Almost 1 minute each, except we have two parties picked out for each topic. Under healthcare, we have the Progressive Conservatives and the New Democrats. Then, if there's any time left over, we'll open it up for further discussion, but I want to keep this quick. The lightning round. We have a question. Thomas from Morinville. Thomas, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, panelists, for your valuable time today. My name is Thomas Holmes. I live in Morinville. I'm a school counselor at Nemeo School that supports students early childhood to grade 9. School counselors have become increasingly rare in many parts of the province, even though school counselors provide frontline assistance to students that face challenging personal issues, including concerns related to mental health. What is your party willing to do to appropriately support the mental health of every student in Alberta? Thank you.
Minister?
Thank you. That is a great question, because I can tell you that some work has already started. A few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of spending time at the Children's Hospital in Calgary in the psychiatric unit, speaking with a large number of psychiatrists, and we have already initiated some dialoguing with Minister Fred Horn, our Minister of Health, and it all ties around bullying. But obviously it will have other secondary benefits in the school, because for us to eradicate bullying, it's sometimes very difficult to identify the bully. Bullies tend to be good at bullying and they're difficult to catch. But we also have to develop the competency in identifying victims of bullying, and that plays into mental health as well. So you will see more collaboration. You know, my age perhaps may not indicate, but as you sense by my accent, my first 6 years of schooling was in Europe, where having a nurse and having a counselor in school was a norm. And I found that through my personal experience to be of a lot of benefit. And that is what my vision is, and that is where I want to head towards, to have those auxiliary services available within school, not only for the benefit of students, but also for the benefit of the community.
Well,
so
you know,
will see more collaboration and focusing on mental health in the context of bullying and all the other benefits that come along from it. Kirich.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, I think, first of all, I mean, this government has talked for a long time about wraparound services, and we need to, you know, work together and collaborate. But the fact of the matter is we had more resources in our schools supporting kids who had special needs, who had mental health issues before than we do now. So talk is cheap. Unfortunately, making the really hard decisions, providing the services that our kids need is not. And so we need to make the proper investment. Ultimately, it comes down to this. Who do you trust to do the kind of work that will provide this support, both in our healthcare or in our schools, but in our communities broadly? We have a premier who made a bunch of promises. One of her promises was to have a broad-ranging healthcare inquiry or public inquiry into intimidation. She broke that promise. So I'm not sure that you can trust this premier. On the issue of mental health, this government has the lowest funding per capita mental health in the country. We have half the national average of beds and spaces for people with mental health of the whole country. Yet we're one of the the wealthiest province in the nation. This is shameful. It's absolutely shameful. For the last 4 years, while we're in a boom and we led the country in economic activity, we froze funding to special needs kids. None of this can be allowed to continue. We should be quite ashamed of our record on this. We should put those resources back into the schools. We should put more resources into the schools, and we should provide a truly equitable access to education for all kids, regardless of the challenges they face when they arrive in our schools in the morning. That hasn't been happening. It has to happen in the future.
We'll open it up for response.
Thomas, you're doing God's work, and thank you. The other Thomas. I've been an inner city doc for 20 years. I've looked after the homeless, the hungry, those without a voice. Suicide is the #1 cause of death, accidental cause of death under 44. We have more suicides than we have car accident deaths. And all the car accident deaths, you know what? 10 to 15% are actually head-on collisions, they're suicides. People get drunk, they go down the wrong way, and they hit a rig. I know because I'm a STARS doc. We have 60,000 kids seeking mental health services every year, my dear friends. 60,000. Mental health is a childhood illness. 50% of mental health issues present by age 14. It's the health of the mother preconception that determines the brain development. The symptoms are actually visible at 18 to 24 months. We need to embed mental health and addictions counselors into the schools. Even before they get to the schools, every mother needs fantastic prenatal care and postnatal care, and we need parenting coaches and midwives. And we must make this a priority. And closing Alberta Hospital Edmonton is not how you fix this problem.
Thank you, Raj Sherman.
Thank you.
I'm going to cut you off there. And Sue Huff.
I agree that absolutely we need a strong mental health strategy, and it's kind of odd to me that we don't have one. We also need an early childhood and learning and child care plan, which we also don't have. Our party, we're a brand new party, we're 2 years old, and we've introduced a bill to create an early childhood plan. It seems odd that a new party would have to do that wouldn't be already in place, and that we wouldn't have a good mental health strategy in place already. But we do have some rather serious deficits, and I think there should be counselors. To answer the question, I think there should be more counselors in schools that develop real relationships with kids, not just pop in and pop out. Thank you.
Mr. Marciano, please.
mental health issues are one of the areas where our healthcare system is particularly failing. There's lots of things wrong with our healthcare system, but generally, once you get into the system, it's pretty good. Not in mental health issues. And our party's just recently picked up a candidate who was a forensic psychiatrist at Alberta Hospital for a long, long time, and he was constantly fighting budget decisions that would have put inappropriate people back on the street because we have not properly set up the mental health system, and it's the area where the patients are least likely to be politically influential, and as a result, it's been the area where things have been ignored the longest, and it's got to be fixed. And the truth of the matter is, it does start in the schools, and we do need to create programs to identify folks right from the very beginning.
Thank you very much.
He is. He is, if it's a judicial inquiry where he's protected, because right now, Alberta Health is holding his records and will not release them.
Thank you. We'll move on to discuss the economy, finance, or treasury. The questions will be first to the New Democratic Party, Rachel Notley, and then to the Alberta Liberal Party, Mr. Sherman. We have a question from Ray from Grand Prairie.
And good morning once again. Thank you for coming, candidates. My name is Ray Buziak. I teach grade 3 people at Avondale School in Grand Prairie. My question, as corporations grow in size and wealth, their power increases correspondingly. How does government regulate these large corporations so that the best interests of the people at large is maintained? How do we care for those who can't compete in a global economy?
Well, I think what we need to do is look at how we care for each other in our community. And part of doing that, of course, focuses on looking at where we get our revenue from in this province, how we pay for those grand objectives that we've talked about a lot today. One of the things that the NDP believes and has believed for a very, very long time is that we need to have a fair rate of taxation in this province. We need to eliminate the flat tax, and we also need to ask our corporations to pay their fair share. Now, I understand that the Liberals have also come out with a policy recently around corporate taxes, but I do want to point out that over the last 8 years, as this government slowly reduced our corporate tax rate down to 10%. There was only one party that voted against those every time it happened, and it was the NDP. So I think when you look at these solutions, you need to also look at consistency and what it is that you can actually trust the party will do should they get that opportunity. So we need to ask our corporations to pay more. Right now, we're far beyond simply competitive. We are giving it away in a way, and we're subsidizing the corporate sector in a way that jeopardizes and compromises very important public services which are key to our values as Albertans. We also need to look at revenue in our resource industry. We need to be starting to get a fairer share of the royalties from the resources that we own. We are currently giving them away in a way that makes us one of the lowest charging jurisdictions in the world. And in doing that, we compromise our current ability to fund these programs we care about, and also we compromise our future in terms of our ability to save for the future and plan for a transition in our economic development. These are key areas. We are the only party that is talking about both of these areas. And this is something that needs to be happen to balance our future, balance our economy, balance our expectations, and to do it in a responsible way so that we don't find ourselves going to the education pot every year to carve out a bunch of money when we find ourselves a little bit short.
Thank you. Ross Sherman?
Ray, thank you. Here's a question I had. Oil's at $100 a barrel. Everyone's working. We have all this investment. We have a deficit? Excuse me? We have two deficits, a financial deficit and a social deficit. The lowest post-high school graduation rate in the country, lowest post-secondary participation rate, the highest spending and lowest performing healthcare system in the country. Once you get in, it's actually great care. So how do we fix this? Number one, it all starts with leadership. Looking at election finance reform for leadership races, because these guys have become the party of the Progressive Corporation Party. That's got to stop. You can't buy a leader. You can donate $1 million and buy a leader, and buy the leader of a party in a leadership race. Secondly, election finance reform. With respect to raising revenue, we said, look, let's put it on the table. We got to raise taxes on the top 10%, and on large corporations, it's okay for them to make a buck. We want them to create jobs. That's a good thing. But when they make money, we want an extra 2 cents a dollar. We got to bring in independent monitoring to protect our environment and strict enforcement of the rules. The rules that the Conservatives have encourage them to break the rules, profit, and keep breaking the rules. They've been screwing Albertans for too damn long. Now this has got to stop. And
Would you raise
you're right.
their royalties? Would you raise the royalties, Raj?
We need to get rid of 3 layers of managers in healthcare and put them back into the front lines. Get rid of managers managing managers. Get rid of political managers managing managers. And let's do a forensic audit so we're collecting the royalties that we should collect.
There was an audit. There were 2 audits. Both of them suggested we needed to significantly increase our royalties, and this government ignored that. We don't need another audit. We need leadership.
Thank you. We'll hear from the other 3 participants. Very briefly, I would encourage you.
I'll just hop in there that the question, if we remember what the question is, I find politicians don't often answer the question. The question was, how do we regulate big corporations? And I think there is a piece there that we need to strengthen our democracy so that we actually do have full disclosure of donations and that we lower the donation limit. We need to decouple corporations from political parties, and we need to have full and open transparency and good monitoring. The second question is, how do we help those that can't compete in our current market? That was the question. So our party has a housing strategy, a literacy strategy, an early childhood strategy, and a strategy to incorporate and integrate a framework, because we have a lot of people out there that are trying to help, but they're not all talking to each other. So I think there are a number of things that we could do to show real leadership and compassion. I think Albertans are compassionate, and they want public policy that reflects that compassion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really quickly, there are 2 very big questions, and the truth is that the answer to the second one ties back to the first one. How do we care for the vulnerable in our society? Well, the number one thing we can do is have a strong, vibrant economy that's producing lots of jobs and lots of wealth that we can then transfer down and look after the vulnerable. And to do that, we need to have a good corporate sector, and we need to have an efficient corporate sector. We need to have a corporate sector that is employing people and making money and wants to invest in Alberta. But I'm sensitive to the question about moderating their power. And the truth of the matter is that when you have the same party in government for 40 years, it becomes very easy to figure out where to focus all of your lobbying attention and your political donations and your focus on how to make friends and influence people. And what we have in Alberta is a government that's very deeply entrenched and beholden to special interests, looks after their special interests, looks after their friends, moves their staff from their offices into special interests and friends. And one of the ways you change that is by electing a new government and disrupting it.
Thank you very much. The last but not least, Thomas Lukaszek.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock and it was out of time, but I'm glad you gave me a second here. How do we control corporations? Well, you know, when you look at the province, and it's easy to highlight issues that you think don't work, but you have to look at the total sum. This province attracted 128,000 new Albertans last year alone. And there is a reason why these other Canadians came to this province. Why? Because this province is a beacon of optimism and future. Canadians are packing their bags and moving to Alberta because they choose to live in Alberta. Why? Because they know that they will find a job that pays more than in any other province in the country, highest weekly average earnings. They know that their kids will get the best education possible because we outperform every province. And even on a healthcare front, you know, it always concerns me when we have medical doctors undermining the confidence of the healthcare system. You know, when a bus hits me on the street one day, I know for a fact that I will be treated by the best doctors, like Raj.
Don't tell anybody the truth. You're undermining confidence.
In an emergency center, and I know that I will get world-class healthcare in our hospitals. And that is why others are coming to the province of Alberta. Are there issues? Yes, there are issues. And are we going to work through them? Yes, we are. but not through being negative and highlighting the negatives, but through the way we have been doing this up to now.
Thank you very
It's
much.
not a coincidence why we are as a province where we are right now.
I'm going to have to end discussion there. It's been terrific. Thank you all. What we should do now, and we are running out of time, and the participants on stage and in the audience have been very, very patient, remarkably so. We should move on to the closing statements. I don't like to do this to the questioners, but I would suggest that at lunch you may want to approach the panelists and ask your questions individually. What I will do now is open the floor to the 2-minute closing statements, and I will keep each participant to those 2 minutes. And we'll start with, this time, Thomas Lukaszek.
Okay. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. The fact that you're here on a Saturday morning doesn't surprise me, and the commitment is obvious. But I have to tell you that I am proud of what we have achieved. When I say we, I mean all of us, and not only teachers and government together, but frankly as Albertans. And I am deeply convinced, and without any shame will tell anybody in any province in any country that this is the best place to raise your family and to live. And it is not through coincidence. It is through the hard work of teachers and other parents and other Albertans. And we have the Alberta that we have built. And in large part, our education system is the foundation of the Alberta that we have built. And it has been obvious, I hope, to all of you that education is one of our 2 priorities, healthcare and education, because we do realize that to build a strong Alberta, we have to have children that are appropriately educated, that are compassionate citizens, and that are competitive in not only the economy of today, but 20 and 30 years from now. And I view this as a partnership, and I think it has been working exceptionally well. So it is with a great pride that we will be entering this election, not only on our track record, but on the positive vision that we will be offering for Albertans. We will be offering Albertans the vision of a future that encompasses investment in healthcare, investment in education, but most importantly, at the end of the day, investment in Albertans. Albertans who know that they will have a job, Albertans who know that they will be respected, Albertans who know that when they graduate, their diploma or their degree will be respected throughout the world, and Albertans who know that they will be able to live a balanced, fulfilling life, when unfortunately that is not available in most of the world, even within our country. So I know for a fact that I can proudly stand before you and say that together, because governments will continue to make mistakes no matter what political party you elect.
Thank you, Thomas
But together,
Lukaszek.
we will continue building a strong Alberta.
Rachel, since we're going this way, Rachel Notley.
Well, thank you very much, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to have this discussion with some of you and with the panel members here, and thank you to all my panel member colleagues for being here today. As I said at the beginning, the NDP vision of Alberta's future is that we create the opportunities for us to share in the prosperity which this government has, and which this province has. It's not the government's prosperity, it's our prosperity. And it's time we start sharing it more equally. The greater the inequity in any community, the lower the quality of life for everybody. And it's important that we focus on that equity and that we focus on sharing that prosperity. Equality of opportunity can be most promoted through our education system, and you as teachers are agents of that important social change, and I congratulate you and thank you for the work that you do on that every day. But it's not enough just to give you lip service. What we need to do is make sure we back that up with resources and solid commitments. So if I haven't totally summarized our position on the following issues, let me just run through them very quickly in 56 seconds. The NDP would phase out funding to private schools. The NDP would properly fund class size limits on the basis of what the Learning Commission recommended so many years ago that we never actually got to. We would introduce a targeted school lunch program. We would move forward as soon as possible on full-day kindergarten. We would increase special needs funding, recognizing the challenges of those kids and also recognizing the growing challenges that exist with newcomers and new Canadians in our urban centers and the extra work that needs to be done there. We would provide predictable and full funding. We would, and finally, what we would do is we would also recognize the community school as one of those choices that people keep talking about and come up with some creative solutions to allow those to remain in our communities. Thank you very much for the work that you do every day, and good luck as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here to answer your questions and share the spotlight and stage with my colleagues. Thank you, guys. There are many good things happening in this province. This still is the best province and the best country in the world. And that's because of the individual efforts of hardworking people like you and those who you've taught. There are things that we can do better in this province, and that's what our positive vision is about. It's about saying yes to the people. Government's job is to lead. And the moral lens through which we should make the decisions is what's best for our children. What's best for our kids? From our economy, which is to diversify our markets to the international marketplace, but let's build that refinery that the Indigenous peoples want to build. And let's deal with the environmental issues. Let's protect our land, water, and our soil. Yes, jobs are very important for working families. They put food on the table. And when people work, let's bring in fair taxation so we can actually deal with the needs of the people. If you can't look after yourself, well, we will look after you. The thickness of your wallet will not determine whether you get care or not, or whether you get education. Education is the building block of our society. We commit to fully funding education, and education is a major commitment on our platform. That requires leadership, and what it requires is for you to lend the New Alberta Liberals your vote for one election. With two Conservative parties, I believe we can change our government. It's time, my dear friends, to change our government, because what was once a source of good and solutions in this province now is the cause of our problems. I offer you a new vision. Please go to albertaliberal.com, look at our platform. If you like what you see in it, please get your family and friends to support it. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Let me start off by thanking you for the invitation to come here and talk about Wild Rose's education policy and some of our ideas. I'm going to break just for a second, and I do want to clarify one point that was mentioned earlier that I didn't get a chance to rebut. There was some suggestion that Conservative parties are into union busting, and I do find the argument a little bit offensive. Guy Boudelier, who was originally scheduled to be here, was a longtime proud ATA member. I taught labor relations at the University of Alberta Business School for a long time, and I would never be a part of a political party that believed in union busting. To shift to education policy, a strong education system is essential to Alberta's future, and we're all going to have to work together to face those challenges. As a party, Wild Rose is committed to ensuring that Alberta's children are ready to be leaders in our global economy. We think it's the single most important thing that we can do in terms of long-run planning. I want to summarize for you our commitments to you, and I want you to recognize that we're headed in the same direction. We may choose sometimes, and you may not necessarily agree with all of the paths that we're going to take to get there, but Wild Rose's commitments on education, I think, are things that you can all agree with. We're committed to more education funding. We want more teachers for our children. We want more schools where they're needed, and we want those decisions to be depoliticized. We're comfortable and we want more parental choice. We want more and improved student learning and assessment with a focus on students getting good results. And we also believe in more support for students with special needs. When you put those elements together, I think you end up with a better system. Now, government has to work with the ATA, has to work with stakeholders to implement those strategies. We have a great education system. It can be better. And we think that with the change in government, voting Wild Rose, and coming to the table and working on these principles and these goals, these are our commitments to you, we can get to a better Alberta for parents and our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sue Huff.
Thank you. I want to thank the ATA and all the teachers in Alberta for advocating for children who are, by and large, voiceless in our society. They don't get to vote. I want to thank teachers for dedicating their lives to our collective future. I want to thank you for enduring hours of squeaking clarinets and flat trumpets because you believe that junior high students are capable of making beautiful music one day. I just went to my daughter's recital for her band yesterday, so that's front of mind how incredible Joel Forth, if you're watching, from Westmount is to do that work. And I want to thank you all for raising the issue of education in this election and every single election and making sure that all candidates understand how critically important education is. And I believe as talented and as knowledgeable as the panelists are here today, and I include myself in this group, our knowledge is very limited. The answers on how to improve education and our education system will not come from us. They will not come from 30,000 feet up. They will come from people like you who are on the ground, who live and breathe education every single day. And I think it's time for all of you to let your voice be heard. So I want to tell you my email address, sue@albertaparty.ca, my phone number, 780-709-4036. I actually do want to hear from you. As a trustee, I took phone calls all the time, and I think it's critically important that we start including your voice, and I hope you will help us to make our education policy the very best it can be. Thank you.
Well, we're out of time. I would like to thank the audience very much for sitting through. I've never seen a group this large sit so patiently for so long. It's a remarkable feat in and of itself. But I would especially like to thank the 5 panelists for giving us a very good look at education policies of their particular parties and to engage in something of a debate over this terribly important issue. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Just a few things before we break here for lunch. I would like to thank you, first of all, for your insightful questions. It allowed the panel an opportunity to identify some, I think, significant similarities, but also some perhaps surprising differences, maybe not that surprising. We were joking a little bit at right around 10 o'clock as we're trying to get all 5 members together at the table at the same time. There were some jokes about hurting politicians. And if you want to look at things in that light, what a remarkable job Keith has done. He's a really strong border collie for us. Thank you, Keith. We have many opportunities to be proud as Canadians, and I saw one this morning. I believe I would like to say thank you to Sue and Vito, Raj, Rachel, Thomas, of the respect you showed for each other with things happening in the U.S. right now and the television coverage that we receive. To see politicians respectful of each other's positions, I think, is one of the reasons we're proud Canadians. You did a remarkable job of representing the positions of your party. You held this audience captive for 2 hours. They were well behaved as well. So,
good classroom management.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
As it is report card season, I think the comment you're going to get is on your report card, well behaved and respectful of others. We do have a token of our appreciation for your presence and time with us this morning, and Jonathan will act as our Vanna. There are tables set up in the rotunda if you would like further information about the platforms of all 5 of the parties. We're going to break for lunch right now. We would invite our politicians to remain with us if they have that time and speak further with the teachers. We need to be back here promptly at 1 o'clock as we have a timed item and people with schedules to keep. So enjoy your lunch and we'll see you back at 1.
Okay, I was wondering.
I gotta open. I always.
Oh,
very much.